In 1856, the British Empire executed one of the most calculated political heists in history. Major General James Outram did not use cannons or infantry to seize the kingdom of Awadh. He used strategic silence. By systematically ignoring the sovereign, violating the Treaty of 1801, and creating an administrative vacuum, Outram paralyzed a state that had been a loyal British ally for over a century. This script deconstructs the cold, bureaucratic psychological warfare that secured a province of 15 million people without a single shot being fired, and how that very silence eventually triggered the bloodiest uprising of the 19th century. By the mid-19th century, the East India Company had shifted from a trading entity to an aggressive territorial power. Under the governorship of Lord Dalhousie, the doctrine of lapse was being used to absorb states like Jhansi and Nagpur. However, Awadh, known as the Garden of India, presented a legal hurdle. Unlike other states, the Nawabs of Awadh had been exceptionally loyal to the British. They had provided loans to the company during the Nepal Wars and the Afghan Wars. Legally, the British had no grounds for a hostile takeover, yet the economic incentive was too great. Awadh was a 24,000 square mile territory with an annual tax revenue of 15 million rupees. It was also the primary recruitment hub for the Bengal Army. The British military machine was essentially powered by Awadhi men, while the company's treasury was being drained by colonial expansion. To Dalhousie, the annexation of Awadh was an economic necessity. The man chosen to execute this plan was Major General James Outram. Appointed as the British resident at Lucknow in 1854, Outram was not just a soldier, he was a master of political manipulation. His mandate was clear: find or manufacture a reason to end the Nawab's rule. The official pretext chosen was misgovernment. The British claimed that Nawab Wajid Ali Shah was incapable of maintaining order and that the peasantry was suffering under a corrupt administration. In reality, the administrative struggles of Awadh were largely a result of the Treaty of 1801, which forced the Nawab to pay for British troops while stripping him of the power to collect taxes efficiently. Outram's primary weapon was not a declaration of war, but the calculated use of strategic silence. Upon his arrival in Lucknow, he began a process of social and diplomatic withdrawal. In the highly formalized political culture of the Nawabi court, the presence and engagement of the British resident were the ultimate markers of the king's legitimacy. Outram began systematically refusing to attend court ceremonies, festivals, and mushairas, poetry gatherings. This was not a personal preference. It was a psychological operation. By withdrawing, Outram sent a silent signal to the Awadhi nobility, the merchants, and the local landowners, talukdars, that the British no longer recognized the Nawab as a functional sovereign. In direct negotiations, Outram utilized the prolonged pause to break the Nawab's administration. When the Nawab's ministers presented documents, proposed administrative reforms, or pleaded for the fulfillment of old treaty obligations, Outram would simply refuse to engage. Minutes of silence would fill the room. He would neither agree nor disagree. This silence created a state of social death for the administration. It communicated that the Nawab's words were of so little consequence that they did not even merit a verbal rejection. This psychological attrition was designed to make the Nawab feel that his sovereignty had already vanished, even before a formal proclamation was made. While maintaining this wall of silence with the central government, Outram was highly active behind the scenes. He began corresponding directly with regional power brokers, bypassing the Lucknow court entirely. He leaked information to local leaders that the British were planning a takeover and that those who cooperated would have their land rights protected under the new regime. This fractured the internal unity of the kingdom. Simultaneously, Outram was flooding Calcutta with biased reports, documenting every instance of rural crime as proof of the Nawab's failure, while ignoring similar or worse crime rates in British-controlled territories like Bengal or the northwestern provinces. By late 1855, the pressure reached its peak. Outram was instructed to deliver an ultimatum. The Nawab must sign a new treaty that would surrender all administrative and revenue-collecting powers to the East India Company. In exchange, he would keep his title and a pension. The treaty was a legal fiction designed to make a forced annexation look like a voluntary transfer of power. When Wajid Ali Shah attempted to negotiate the terms, Outram retreated into total non-engagement. For weeks, the residence office refused to answer letters from the palace. This enforced silence paralyzed the kingdom's bureaucracy. Local officials, unsure of who was in charge, stopped remitting taxes. The state's financial system began to collapse under the weight of British-imposed uncertainty. On February 4, 1856, Outram formally informed the Nawab that the British were taking over the province. In a final desperate meeting, Wajid Ali Shah protested, citing the long history of his family's loyalty to the British crown. He reminded Outram of the treaties that guaranteed his independence. Outram's response was a chilling display of bureaucratic indifference. He sat in silence, offering no defense and no argument. He simply waited for the Nawab to finish speaking before stating that the order from Calcutta was final. On February 7, 1856, the annexation was officially proclaimed. Wajid Ali Shah, realizing that his words fell into a void, refused to sign the humiliating treaty. He decided to travel to Calcutta to appeal to the Governor-General, and from there to London. The British assumed control of the 15 million rupee revenue stream immediately. Outram assumed the role of chief commissioner of the newly annexed province. In his official dispatches, he boasted that the takeover was bloodless, and that the people had accepted British rule with sullen but quiet submission. This was a monumental misreading of the situation. The silence Outram had used as a weapon had not disappeared. It had shifted to the population. The summary settlement of 1856, introduced immediately after annexation, was a radical land reform that stripped the talukdars of their ancestral lands and increased tax assessments on the peasantry. The British were determined to extract every possible rupee from the province to pay off their debts. The silent Fatah, quiet victory, lasted only 15 months. The resentment generated by Outram's psychological warfare and the blatant violation of the 1801 treaty became the catalyst for the great uprising of 1857. The sepoys of the Bengal army, most of whom were from Awadh, saw the annexation as a personal betrayal. They had fought for the British across Asia, only to have their own homes seized by the company through deception. The displaced talukdars and the unemployed soldiers of the Nawab's disbanded army formed a massive, coordinated resistance. When the rebellion broke out in May 1857, Awadh became the epicenter of the war. The British residency in Lucknow, the very site where Outram had orchestrated the kingdom's collapse through silence, became the site of a brutal 140-day siege. The British officers and their families were trapped by the same people they had disenfranchised. James Outram, who had been promoted and sent to lead the Persian War, was forced to return to Lucknow to command the relief operations. He found himself fighting a desperate urban war in a city he thought he had secured through negotiation. The siege of Lucknow and the subsequent pacification of Awadh were among the most violent episodes of the 19th century. Thousands were killed and the cultural and physical landscape of Lucknow was decimated. The British victory in 1858 was total, but it was achieved at a cost that nearly bankrupted the company and led to its eventual dissolution. The British Crown took direct control of India, primarily to prevent another Awadh-style disaster. The story of James Outram and the annexation of Awadh is a study in the dark side of diplomacy. It proves that sovereignty can be eroded through 1,000 small acts of disrespect and the systematic refusal to engage. Outram's silence was more effective than a division of infantry in the short term, but it was also more destructive in the long term. He succeeded in securing a province, but in doing so, he destroyed the trust that held the empire together. Today, the ruins of the Lucknow Residency stand as a monument to this history. The walls, still pockmarked by cannon fire from the 1857 rebellion, are a physical record of the violence that follows psychological oppression. The coins of Wajid Ali Shah, which the British tried to erase from circulation, and the poetry written by the exiled king in Calcutta remain as a counter-narrative to the British reports of bad governance. Ultimately, James Outram's career is a reminder that power operates through the manipulation of recognition. By refusing to hear the Nawab, Outram made the Nawab irrelevant. But by refusing to hear the grievances of a province, he invited a storm that changed the course of Indian history. The silence he used as a weapon in 1856 was eventually broken by the roar of the 1857 uprising, an event that signaled the beginning of the end for the British East India Company. The annexation of Awadh was not a humanitarian mission, It was a cold-blooded strategic maneuver that prioritized revenue over treaties and administrative silence over human engagement.